Now that we've looked at what creditor management isn't, and also what days creditor calculation is, let's look at how to improve days creditors. And the first thing that I'm going to be overbearing on is it's a balancing act. So with debtors, with stock, with work in progress, the goal is to get money into the business as soon as possible. Whereas with creditors, the opposite of that isn't necessarily the case, where you want to stretch people out so that they never get paid or get paid very late. So it's a balancing act, and that's where good planning and applying the right tool to the situation is crucial for this part of the conversation. Now let's go through the individual strategies themselves. The first one is look at your average days creditors by supplier. There might be some suppliers that you're actually paying in 16 days and others that you're paying in 35 days. But the one that you're paying on 16 days might not need you to actually pay them for 30 days. So get a strategy in place with your accounts payable team to make sure that if we've decided to pay somebody 2 terms and not pay them in advance because there's no value that we're going to receive from doing that, then make sure we don't pay them a day sooner than what they need to. That is the balancing act in that situation. If you're paying 2 terms, you are a good client to them. If you're going beyond that, then that becomes questionable, and the further you go out, it becomes more and more questionable, and also how frequently that happens. So if they're not willing to give you extra value for paying quicker, then use their terms that they've provided. So understand that calculation by supplier. It's the exact same calculation as the days creditors overall, but in this case, just doing it by an individual supplier. The next element to look at is, are there any suppliers we pay COD, cash on delivery, unnecessarily? Does someone go down to the shops with the credit card or the bank card and immediately just put the payment on there so the money goes out of the bank account straight away, even if it's a credit card? That means that you're still paying for that COD, which is pushing down your days creditors. You shouldn't have any suppliers within your business unless absolutely necessary that aren't on supply terms. So review all your suppliers and try to get everyone who you're using for COD away from COD and open up a formal account with them. The next strategy for days creditors improvement is communication. So much of finance and business improvement comes down to that simple word of communication. So when you're dealing with a supplier, seek them out. Share with them your journey over the next 12, 24 months. And this can be done not necessarily just to stretch your credit terms out with somebody, but also in terms of what we spoke about earlier, we're getting a better deal with them. So it might be better terms, it might be a cheaper price, it might be better supply in terms of the consistency of the supply. So it can work with other elements of our strategy, not just necessarily getting to pay them a little later than what we have in the past. So communicate with them what your strategy is, how much you want to spend with them. If you're dealing with various different suppliers of the same product, what can they do to be the single supplier of that product and give you better terms, better pricing, and make you that financial powerhouse we've been talking about in terms of your working capital management from a creditor perspective. The key part with communication is simply just ask. So many businesses don't realize how impactful their custom is to their supplier. There's always an assumptive relationship of going, hey, yeah, we're probably doing the best we can. Ask the question, what's the worst that's going to happen? They just say, no, we'll continue it as it is. So then the question becomes, well, do we seek somebody else to use, or do we continue as is? Differing strategies can be used in this. You can use emails, you can use letters. The best though is pick up the phone and speak to somebody. There's nothing like that human interaction. And one step further, even aim for a Zoom conversation, an in-person conversation, because you're going to be able to get a feel for their business, and they're going to be a lot more candid and comfortable with you in person, whether that's virtually, like this conversation now, or whether that is in person. And again, you're not going to do it for every supplier. If it's a stationary supplier that you spend $1,000 with a year versus a key supplier that you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars with a year, of course you're going to spend more time with that second supplier. But have a strategy in place for communicating your journey with them to get better terms, lower price, and some other additive or intangible around their supply. The final strategy is asking, well, what do I have to do to get the outcome I'm looking for? Because you're going to go to suppliers and they're not going to be willing to budge and they might not change at all. Now, firstly, if you're running a business that is not willing to offer credit supplies to anybody, that might be very stifling for your business. But if you're dealing with a supplier that isn't willing to change and there's reasons why, ask them, what do I need to do to either get the prompt payment discount, get better supply, or potentially getting longer terms for payment? Because remember, credit is a discretionary offering. Also with credit, like it is with the bank, you're potentially going to have a score with that business. And if you're starting from a low base, they're not going to be willing to just give you extended credit terms for a long period of time. You might have to pay COD or a lot less days while you're getting your credit worthiness back to where it was or where it needs to be. So be conscious of where you're at in terms of how your supplier sees you. If you feel like there's no good reason for what they're offering and the reasons why they're doing it don't sort of back up where you feel like you've been as a client to them, then seek alternatives. And if yes, they have a monopoly on what they're offering, then you're not going to have much of a choice and you've explored everything you can and you've had a go at doing it. But the key element is to review each supplier in the detail necessary for the size of their importance to your business.